Have you ever looked at someone in a position of power and just wondered, how did they get there? Maybe it's a clueless boss, a self-absorbed politician, or a loud, overconfident executive who somehow keeps climbing the ladder. Meanwhile, the people who actually know what they're doing, thoughtful, skilled, and qualified, stay stuck in the background. We've all seen this. From ancient emperors to modern CEOs, there's a long, weird pattern of seemingly foolish people ending up in charge. And the question is, why? It's tempting to write it off as bad luck or broken systems. But what if there's more to it? What if there's a dark logic behind this pattern? A psychological or even structural reason that foolish people end up in charge? On purpose? That's what we're unpacking today. And to do it, we're going to look at someone who saw this centuries ago. Niccolò Machiavelli, a political thinker from the 16th century whose ideas are still unsettlingly accurate. Now, before you tune out thinking this is just dusty old philosophy, stick around. Because what Machiavelli observed about leadership and human behavior is incredibly relevant today. From corporate boardrooms to global politics, his insights can help you understand why so many power structures seem upside down, and how smart people can actually get edged out of leadership roles, not despite their intelligence, but because of it. So let's go back to Florence, Italy. Early 1500s. Machiavelli was a diplomat, political advisor, and passionate observer of power. After being exiled from political life, he wrote what would become one of the most famous and controversial political books in history, The Prince. Unlike earlier philosophers who imagined how rulers should behave in an ideal world, Machiavelli focused on how power actually works in the real world. And what he found wasn't pretty. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Translation: in the world of power, appearance often matters more than reality. That's our first major clue, because when it comes to leadership, it's often less about being genuinely competent and more about looking the part. In fact, Machiavelli noted that displaying too much intelligence could actually be a liability. Why? Because intelligence often comes with traits that don't play well in power games. Things like self-awareness, nuance, ethical complexity, hesitation. The very qualities that make someone a good thinker or a wise person can make them seem weak, indecisive, or disconnected in environments that reward boldness and certainty. Let's break that down. Say you're someone who thinks deeply. You see gray areas. You ask questions. You admit when you don't know. That's great in a classroom, in science, in thoughtful debate. But in a competitive power structure, where image and confidence matter more than nuance, that same behavior can make you look like you're not strong enough to lead. It's the classic contrast. The philosopher versus the populist. Take Socrates, for example. Brilliant, endlessly inquisitive, committed to exploring truth. He openly admitted, "I know that I know nothing." And how did that go for him? Well, Athens voted to execute him. Compare that to leaders throughout history who rose to power by offering absolute certainty. I alone can fix this. Trust me, only I have the answers. Even today, that formula still works. In fact, it works so well that some psychologists have tried to measure just how much intelligence helps or hurts leadership. A controversial 2017 study published in the Journal of Management made a wild claim. Intelligence only helps leadership effectiveness up to a point. Beyond an IQ of about 120, being smarter may actually make it harder to connect with and influence people. Why? Because extremely intelligent people may think in ways that others struggle to follow. They might communicate in complex, layered terms. They might ask too many questions or hesitate to give easy answers. And when people want quick decisions or clear direction, that kind of complexity can seem like a problem, even if it's actually the right way to lead. So what does this mean? It means being too smart or too thoughtful can be a disadvantage when it comes to getting power, especially in systems that reward simplicity over depth. But intelligence isn't the only factor at play here. Let's talk about something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a well-known psychological bias discovered in the 1990s by researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger. It basically says that the less you know, the more confident you feel, while truly knowledgeable people are often the most uncertain. In other words, people who are bad at something tend to think they're great at it, and people who are actually good tend to be more humble, more aware of their limitations. Shakespeare put it beautifully long before psychology did. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Machiavelli would have loved that. And here's where it gets even more real. Modern research shows this Dunning-Kruger effect shows up all the time in leadership selection. A 2020 study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who come across as confident are more likely to be seen as leaders, regardless of how competent they actually are. Let that sink in. It's not about being right. It's about seeming certain. Confidence looks like competence, even when it's not. That's how people like George Armstrong Custer, for example, can rise quickly through military ranks based on bravado, even when their decisions lead to disaster. It's how tech founders with shaky ideas but charismatic pitch decks, like WeWork's Adam Neumann or Theranos' Elizabeth Holmes, can raise billions of dollars on vaporware. And it's how some political leaders continue to gain followers despite being repeatedly wrong, because they never look unsure. This is the illusion of leadership in action. And it gets worse, because once these kinds of leaders are in power, they often build teams that protect their incompetence instead of challenging it. Machiavelli noticed this too. He wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." Basically, bad leaders surround themselves with even worse people, not by accident, but by design. Why? Because confident subordinates are threatening. They ask questions. They might point out mistakes. They might even be seen as potential replacements. So instead, insecure leaders hire loyalists. Yes men, people who won't rock the boat. This creates what some psychologists call competence-threatening environments. These are workplaces or systems where intelligence is seen as a threat instead of an asset. Have you ever worked somewhere where asking tough questions got you labeled difficult? Where pointing out problems made you seem disloyal? That's exactly what we're talking about. And the result is a kind of institutionalized incompetence. Leaders who don't know what they're doing, surrounded by people who can't or won't help them do it better. It spreads. It becomes the norm. Machiavelli saw it in royal courts. We see it today in political offices, toxic workplaces, and failing organizations. And still, we keep falling for it. We keep choosing leaders who offer us simple, confident answers, even when those answers are wrong. Even when a situation clearly calls for nuance, honesty, or hard truths. Why? That's what we'll dive into in the next part of this video. We're going to explore the psychology behind why we follow the wrong people, why we crave certainty in uncertain times, why confidence trumps competence, and how the most capable minds often get sidelined while fools rise to the top. So, we ended the last section with a question. Why do we keep following the wrong people? Even when they oversimplify, mislead, or act recklessly, we still see them rise. We still choose them. We still vote for them. We still fund them. And the answer has less to do with their intelligence and more to do with ours. Or more specifically, how our brains process uncertainty. Let's start with this truth. People crave certainty. We all do, especially in times of stress, crisis, or confusion. When things feel chaotic, we're naturally drawn to anyone who seems to have all the answers. Even if those answers are wrong, even if they're dangerously simplistic, we gravitate toward leaders who say, "It's simple. Trust me. I know what to do." This instinct goes deep. Cognitive psychology calls it the need for cognitive closure. It's our psychological desire to have clear, definite answers, and to avoid the discomfort of ambiguity. When we're anxious, uncertain, or overwhelmed, this need kicks into overdrive. And here's where it gets tricky. The more complicated the issue, the more we want simple answers. That's the paradox, because the world is getting more complex every day. Climate change, artificial intelligence, healthcare, global supply chains, geopolitics, you name it. Almost every major issue we face today is complex, layered, and full of trade-offs. But we're wired to want simplicity, and so we respond best not to the expert who says, "Well, it depends, but to the loud voice that says, here's the problem, and here's the fix. Machiavelli saw this way back in the 1500s. He wrote, "For the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities, and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are." That's a brutal, honest assessment of human nature. And it's still true today. When you watch a climate scientist explain their work, they'll use phrases like, "This is our best estimate," or "Here's what the data suggests," or "There's a margin of error." That's how real experts talk. Now compare that to a media personality who confidently says, "It's a hoax," or "We know exactly what's happening," or "Don't trust the scientists." Guess which one gets more attention? The confident one. Every time. Because confidence feels like truth, even when it's not. And this dynamic shows up everywhere. Take the healthcare debate. Real doctors will explain that every health system has pros and cons, that trade-offs exist, that perfect solutions don't exist. Meanwhile, political figures will say things like, "Free healthcare for everyone, no downsides," or "The other side wants to destroy your freedom." These aren't arguments, they're slogans. And slogans are powerful because they bypass thinking. They give us what we crave, certainty. And here's something even scarier. In 2017, a team at Yale conducted a study where they gave people math problems, simple statistical puzzles, but framed them in political terms. And what they found was that people's ability to solve the problems dropped significantly when the right answer conflicted with their political beliefs. Even worse, the people with the strongest math skills showed the most bias. In other words, they didn't use their intelligence to find the truth. They used it to defend what they already wanted to believe. That's the danger, because it means that being smart doesn't automatically protect you from manipulation. Sometimes it makes you even better at justifying bad ideas, if those ideas feel emotionally satisfying. So let's zoom out. We've got a world that's more complex than ever. A human brain wired for simplicity, a society that rewards confidence over nuance, and a political and media landscape built around outrage and certainty. Is it any wonder that the most thoughtful, ethical, intelligent people don't end up in charge? In fact, Machiavelli went one step further. He said something that still sends chills if you really think about it. It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good. Let that sink in. Machiavelli believed that moral restraint, the desire to be honest, kind, or fair, can actually become a weakness in political or competitive environments. Because if your opponents are willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate, and you're not, you're already at a disadvantage. Now, that's not to say he endorsed those behaviors. Contrary to popular belief, Machiavelli wasn't encouraging leaders to be evil. He was just describing reality. This is how power actually works, he said. Ignore it at your own peril. So what does this mean for smart, moral people trying to lead? It means they're playing the game with rules their opponents don't follow. Let me give you an example. In ancient Rome, Cicero was a brilliant orator and a man of principle. He believed in the Republic. He tried to preserve it through logic and persuasion. Then came Julius Caesar, ambitious, ruthless, and willing to break every rule. He crossed the Rubicon literally and figuratively and seized power. Guess who won? It wasn't the philosopher. Fast forward to modern times, and the same pattern plays out. Ethical candidates often get steamrolled by political opponents who lie, manipulate, or weaponize fear. Not because they're smarter or more capable, but because they're less constrained. This is what game theorists call a race to the bottom. When unethical behavior is rewarded, it forces others to either play dirty or lose. And it gets worse when the system itself rewards that behavior. Researchers at the University of British Columbia found that traits associated with psychopathy, like lack of empathy and manipulativeness, were actually linked to faster career advancement when combined with charm. In other words, being cold, strategic, and socially polished could be a recipe for rapid success. You see this in politics, in business, in media, across cultures. In China, there's the Shinu stereotype, a ruthless, power-hungry businesswoman who outmaneuvers more ethical competitors. In Nordic countries, which pride themselves on egalitarianism, studies still show that manipulative leaders climb faster than honest ones in many organizations. Why? Because they're not held back by conscience. They're playing a different game. And over time, if these patterns go unchecked, they can change the whole system. What starts as a few bad actors becomes a culture of dysfunction. People learn that doing the right thing doesn't pay off, that appearances matter more than substance, that ethics are optional, and that's how we get institutions, whether political, corporate, or social, that are full of incompetent or dangerous leaders, protected by loyalists, insulated from criticism, and rewarded for failure. It's not random. It's not a glitch. It's a systemic outcome of the structures and psychology we've just explored. Now, I know this all sounds pretty bleak, but here's the thing. Not every environment rewards incompetence. Not every system falls into this trap. And the key to changing it lies in understanding the conditions that do reward intelligence, honesty, and competence. That's what we're going to dig into in part 3. We'll explore the kinds of systems and structures that prevent foolish leaders from rising, that create accountability, and that make moral intelligence an asset, not a liability. Because if we want better leaders, we have to design better systems. Let's take a breath. We spent the last 2 parts exploring some pretty heavy truths. That intelligence doesn't always help you rise to power, that overconfidence beats competence in perception, and that ethical people can actually be handicapped in a ruthless system. It's a lot to take in, but now it's time for the next question. Is it inevitable? Are we doomed to keep rewarding the loudest, least qualified voices forever? Or are there environments where genuine intelligence, integrity, and competence can rise? The answer is yes, but it takes design. Systems matter. Machiavelli, for all his brutal realism, wasn't saying we're powerless. In fact, he believed that by understanding the dynamics of power, we could shape better political structures. His goal wasn't to glorify manipulation. It was to warn us what happens if we don't pay attention. So let's talk about what actually makes a system reward good leadership. It starts with feedback loops. Think about it. In some professions, there's immediate, unforgiving feedback. A surgeon who makes mistakes, patients suffer. An engineer who builds a faulty bridge, it collapses. In these environments, incompetence is visible and punished quickly. That pressure weeds out bad actors fast. You can't fake it for long. But in other fields like politics, big business, or media, feedback is murky, delayed, distorted. If a politician makes a bad decision, they can blame the previous administration. If a CEO tanks a company, they might walk away with a golden parachute. If a media personality lies, they just say it louder the next day. When there's no clear consequence for being wrong, when failure can be spun, incompetence can thrive for years. That's why feedback mechanisms are so critical. Smart systems bake in accountability, independent audits, public transparency, real metrics, not just vague slogans and manipulated stats, but objective benchmarks that anyone can verify. Germany, for example, uses a dual board structure for corporations. One board runs the company, the other oversees and checks that power. It separates execution from oversight. That's powerful. By contrast, overly centralized systems, like the Soviet Union's later years, collapsed under the weight of top-down incompetence with no check and balance. When decisions are made by a small group, in secret, without challenge, it's a recipe for disaster. So the first structural fix? Create environments where feedback is honest, fast, and unavoidable. The second? Distribute power. When power is centralized, especially in one person or a tiny inner circle, it creates the perfect conditions for foolish leadership. There's less scrutiny, less pushback, less diversity of thought. And we see this play out constantly. One executive at the top surrounded by loyal yes men. One strongman leader rewriting laws to extend their term. One founder with total control of a startup, burning through billions before anyone questions them. On the flip side, environments that share power across branches of government, across departments, across expert panels, tend to perform better. Not perfectly, but better. Because they introduce friction. And friction, annoying as it is, prevents disasters. That's why democracies, messy, slow, imperfect as they are, have safeguards that autocracies don't. That's why collaborative organizations catch errors faster than top-down ones. And that's why diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones. Which brings us to the third fix, cognitive diversity. This isn't just about demographics. It's about how people think. When everyone in a room thinks the same way, uses the same jargon, sees problems the same way, they miss things. Blind spots multiply. Flawed ideas go unchallenged. It feels efficient until it fails spectacularly. But when a team includes people who think differently, optimists and skeptics, data people and storytellers, people from different disciplines and backgrounds, you get sharper decisions. Because someone's always asking, wait, what if we're wrong? That's not inefficiency. That's wisdom. And it protects against the Dunning-Kruger effect, overconfidence, groupthink, all the psychological traps we've talked about. Fourth, and this one is huge, clarity of metrics. Machiavelli said, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for all can see a thing, but few can come in touch with it. He meant that people often judge success by appearances, not substance. In modern systems, that plays out through vague metrics. Buzzwords, vanity statistics. You've seen it. A leader posts record profits while cutting jobs and gutting long-term health. A politician touts economic growth that only benefits the top 1%. A company reports user growth while burning billions in cash. When success can be faked, incompetence can thrive. So strong systems make success measurable, meaningful, and public. Think audits, evidence-based outcomes, open dashboards, independent evaluations. No hiding behind showmanship. Finally, one of the most underappreciated factors, incentives. What a system rewards is what it will produce. If you reward short-term wins, people will chase them. If you reward flashy leadership, that's what you'll attract. If you reward loyalty over competence, guess what kind of team you get? This is where the 2008 financial crisis is a perfect example. Banks gave huge bonuses for high-risk, short-term bets. Nobody got paid for managing long-term risk. So guess what everyone did? They maximized short-term profit while building a system that eventually collapsed. If we want better leadership, we have to reward long-term thinking, ethical behavior, constructive dissent, humility, real performance, not just appearances. Ask yourself this. In your workplace, your community, your country, what behaviors get rewarded? Who gets promoted? Who gets silenced? The answers will tell you exactly what kind of leaders you're breeding. So let's recap. What kinds of environments protect against foolish leadership? First, honest feedback loops, distributed power and accountability, cognitive diversity and disagreement, transparent, meaningful metrics, incentives that reward real competence and ethics. These are the structures that filter out the manipulators, the narcissists, the overly confident amateurs. They make it harder to fake your way into power, and they create space for real, thoughtful, morally grounded people to lead. But there's a catch. Even in these systems, fools and frauds can still rise. Why? Because they use specific tactics to manipulate the system. And that's what we'll explore in Part 4. We'll look at how incompetent or manipulative leaders keep themselves in power through tribalism, chaos, distraction, and identity manipulation, and how you can spot those tactics in your own life. Because ultimately, no system is perfect. And that means we also need strong personal practices to protect ourselves and our communities from bad leadership. So stick around. The final part will show you how to resist manipulation, not just in the world around you, but in your own mind. So far, we've talked about how the wrong people often rise to power, and how smart, moral individuals can get left behind. We've explored the psychology, the systems, the incentives. And we've even looked at how to build better environments that reward real leadership. But even in well-designed systems, manipulative, incompetent leaders can still rise. How? Because they don't play fair. They use psychological tactics, hacks, if you will, that bypass logic and exploit emotion. Tactics Machiavelli himself would have recognized instantly. Let's walk through 4 of the most common ones. And more importantly, let's talk about how to defend against them. Tactic 1. Us versus them. This is the oldest trick in the book. Create a tribe. Incompetent leaders don't want scrutiny. They want loyalty. So they build emotional loyalty by dividing people into us and them. You're either with them or against them. This shuts down criticism. It transforms thoughtful disagreement into betrayal. Psychologists call this identity fusion, when a person's identity becomes fused with a group or a leader. When that happens, any attack on the leader feels like a personal attack on the follower. So now, facts don't matter. Reason doesn't matter. Loyalty becomes everything. This is how cults form. It's how demagogues rise. It's how smart people become fiercely loyal to foolish or even dangerous leaders. You've seen it before on both sides of the political spectrum, in companies, even in fandoms. And the fix? It starts with emotional awareness. Ask yourself, is my loyalty based on values or just identity? Can I criticize the people I support without feeling like I'm betraying something? If not, you're probably caught in a tribal loop. Tactic 2. Chaos and cognitive overload. Another classic move, create confusion. Constantly, bad leaders stay in power by overwhelming you with scandals, crises, and noise. They move so fast, change positions so often, and create so much chaos that people can't keep up. We burn out. We tune out. We stop asking questions because it's just too much. This is what psychologists call cognitive load. Our brains can only handle so much complexity. And when we're overwhelmed, we default to shortcuts, usually sticking with what feels familiar and emotionally safe. Machiavelli would have smiled at this tactic because it's brilliant in a brutal kind of way. The defense? Slow down. Take a step back. Don't try to react to everything. Zoom out. Ask, what's the bigger pattern here? Who benefits from this chaos? Who gains when people stop thinking? And more importantly, protect your mental energy. You don't need to fight every small battle. Pick your focus. Stay grounded. Tactic 3. Reality distortion, aka doublethink. In 1984, George Orwell called it doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time and believe both. Modern leaders who want to avoid accountability do this constantly. They deny saying something they were recorded saying. They shift blame. They change their story. And when caught, they just deny. Eventually, the goal isn't to convince you, it's to wear you down. You start to think, maybe the truth doesn't matter. Maybe facts are just opinions. Maybe everything's fake. And when that happens, the leader wins. Because now, they're not just lying to you. They've made truth feel impossible. How do you fight back? With receipts, with memory, with consistency. Write things down. Save evidence. Track what people say and compare it to what they do. Don't let your brain get trained to forget. And when you see someone constantly shifting reality, gaslighting the public, or rewriting history, name it. Call out. Don't let them move the goalposts. Tactic 4. Exploiting insecurity and fear. This one's subtle, but incredibly effective. In hard times, economic stress, uncertainty, job insecurity, people are more vulnerable to false promises, especially simple ones. Manipulative leaders prey on that vulnerability. They find your fear and weaponize it. They offer scapegoats. They point to those people as the problem. They make you feel like you're under attack, and only they can protect you. It's emotionally comforting, but intellectually dangerous, because fear is the mind killer. It shuts down reasoning. It narrows our focus to survival. And it makes even the most rational people cling to foolish, harmful ideas. The defense? Meet fear with clarity. When you feel afraid or uncertain, pause. Ask yourself, is this fear being used against me? Is someone offering me an easy answer to a complex problem? And if the answer is yes, step back. Don't respond emotionally. Get curious. Get informed. Because fear thrives in darkness, but it dies in light. So now we know, even with good systems, bad actors can still exploit the flaws in human psychology. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. It means we have to build personal defenses, habits, and mindsets that protect us from manipulation. Let me give you 3 of the most powerful. 1. Intellectual humility. This isn't about being uncertain all the time. It's about knowing the limits of what you know. Research shows that intellectually humble people are better at evaluating evidence, resisting manipulation, and learning over time. They don't need to win every argument. They don't need to be right all the time. They can say, "I don't know." And that's a superpower. So practice it. Next time you feel totally sure about something, pause. Ask, what evidence could change my mind? If your answer is nothing, that's a sign you've stopped thinking. 2. Media literacy. We live in the most information-saturated society in history. But more information doesn't mean better understanding. So you have to be selective. Follow people who challenge your views, not just confirm them. Look for long-form content, not just sound bites. Avoid media that thrives on outrage and tribalism. Warren Buffett once said, "Successful people say no to almost everything." Apply that to your mind. Say no to junk information. Say no to hot takes. Say no to outrage for profit. Feed your brain like you'd feed your body, thoughtfully. 3. Philosophical reflection. This is the habit most people never develop, and it's one of the most powerful. Philosophical reflection means stepping back from the noise and asking deeper questions. What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of world am I helping to create? What values matter more than convenience? The Stoics did this every day. So did ancient sages, monks, scientists, revolutionaries. And so can you. It only takes 5 minutes a day. Sit quietly, reflect, journal. Ask yourself not just what's happening, but what matters. Because in a world that wants you distracted, thinking deeply is an act of rebellion. And at the collective level, we need to design institutions that reflect these values. We need accountability systems that actually punish failure and reward real results. Diverse voices in every room, especially ones that challenge the status quo. Transparency laws, audits, oversight, and media that explain, not just entertain. Education that doesn't just teach facts, but cultivates wisdom, ethics, and discernment. Because as Machiavelli wrote, it is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. Power doesn't make someone worthy. How they use it does. So as we close this out, here's the big question. What kind of leader do you want to follow? And what kind of influence do you want to be? We live in a time when foolishness, manipulation, and overconfidence often get rewarded. But that doesn't mean they have to. We can choose to build systems that filter for the right things. And we can choose every day to think clearly, even when it's hard. Because the most powerful thing you can do in a world that profits from confusion is to stay awake, to stay grounded, to stay curious, to stay honest. Thanks for watching. If this video made you think, challenge you, or even made you a little uncomfortable, in a good way, share it. Comment below with your experiences. Let's talk about the systems you've seen. What kind of leadership do you trust? Where have you seen these patterns play out? And remember, understanding how darkness works isn't the same as surrendering to it. It's the first step toward creating light.